10 daily habits that help lower blood pressure naturally. Has your doctor ever told you that high blood pressure is simply something you inherited, something already written into your body, with little you could do about it yourself? Doctors who study this closely have found something far more hopeful. For the vast majority of adults, daily habits matter more than genetics ever will, and small, consistent choices, the kind you can start today, can meaningfully support a healthier blood pressure reading, sometimes within just a few weeks. Before we go any further, a quick note. This video is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you have concerns about your own blood pressure, it may be helpful to speak with a qualified healthcare professional who understands your personal health history and can guide you appropriately. Now, here is something worth sitting with for a moment before we begin. The very last habit on this list, the 10th one, has been linked by researchers to blood pressure improvements that surprised even the doctors studying it. And it costs nothing and takes only a few minutes a day. We will get there soon, but first, let's understand why blood pressure quietly rises in the first place, because that understanding is what makes every habit on this list actually work. High blood pressure, sometimes called hypertension, often develops quietly, almost invisibly. There is rarely a dramatic symptom that announces its arrival, no single moment where a person feels it happening. Instead, it tends to creep in through years of small, repeated patterns. The extra salt on a plate here, the missed walk there, the short night of sleep that slowly turns into a habit rather than a rare exception. This is precisely what makes it both easy to overlook and, fortunately, possible to address. The encouraging part of this story is that because blood pressure responds to daily patterns, it can also respond to daily changes. None of what follows requires a complete overhaul of your entire life overnight. What it requires is consistency, patience, and a willingness to make small adjustments, and that is something almost anyone can build one day at a time, regardless of age or starting point. It is also worth understanding, briefly, what those two numbers on a blood pressure reading actually represent, since so many people see them without ever quite knowing what they mean. The higher number, called systolic pressure, measures the force in your arteries when your heart beats and pushes blood outward. The lower number, called diastolic pressure, measures the force in your arteries when your heart rests briefly between beats. Together, these two numbers offer a snapshot of how hard your cardiovascular system is working at any given moment. A single elevated reading is not necessarily a cause for alarm, since blood pressure naturally fluctuates throughout the day based on activity, stress, hydration, and even the time since your last meal. What tends to matter far more is the overall pattern over weeks and months, which is exactly why the daily habits in this video focus on long-term sustainable change rather than any kind of quick fix. Number 1, cutting back on sodium the smart way. Sodium, which is the scientific name for salt, is often the very first thing people think of when they hear the words blood pressure, and for good reason. Too much sodium in the body can cause it to hold onto extra fluid, which increases the total volume of blood moving through your vessels and may place additional pressure on their walls. But here is what tends to surprise most viewers. The salt shaker sitting on your kitchen table is usually not the main source of the problem. According to public health researchers, the majority of sodium in the average American diet comes from processed and packaged foods. Things like canned soups, deli meats, frozen dinners, boxed side dishes, and restaurant meals, long before anyone ever picks up a shaker at home. Margaret, a 71-year-old retired schoolteacher from Ohio, told her doctor that she barely used salt at home at all, and was genuinely confused as to why her blood pressure remained stubbornly high despite her efforts. Together with her doctor, she reviewed her grocery receipts and her typical weekly meals, and they discovered that her favorite canned vegetable soup, something she had eaten several times a week for years, contained nearly half of her entire recommended daily sodium intake in a single serving. Small discoveries like this one are far more common than people realize, and they highlight why reading nutrition labels can matter more than simply avoiding the shaker altogether. A helpful daily habit is checking the sodium content listed on packaged foods before buying them, and gradually choosing lower sodium versions when they are available, since most people find that their taste buds tend to adjust within just a few weeks, making lower sodium foods taste just as satisfying over time. Number 2, moving your body every single day, even briefly. Physical activity is one of the most well-supported habits for supporting healthy blood pressure, And the encouraging news is that you do not need an intense workout or a gym membership to see meaningful benefits. Regular movement, even something as simple as a brisk 20 to 30-minute walk, may help the heart pump more efficiently over time, which can reduce the overall force placed on artery walls with each heartbeat. What matters most here is consistency rather than intensity. Health researchers often point to walking specifically as one of the most underrated tools available to the general public, largely because it is accessible to almost everyone, regardless of age, fitness level, or financial situation. It requires no equipment, no membership, and can be done almost anywhere. Robert, a 68-year-old retired mechanic, began taking his dog around the block twice a day after his doctor suggested it as a simple, low-pressure starting point. He did not join a gym or dramatically change his diet all at once. Just that one new habit, repeated daily without fail, became something he genuinely looked forward to, a quiet part of his morning and evening routine. Over several months, his readings at home began trending in a noticeably healthier direction. The lesson here is not that walking alone controls blood pressure entirely, but that daily movement, however modest it may seem at first, tends to compound in ways that matter a great deal over time. Number 3, making stress management a real daily practice, not an afterthought. Chronic stress can trigger the body to release certain hormones that temporarily raise blood pressure and heart rate, part of what is often called the body's natural fight or flight response. When stress becomes a near-constant state rather than an occasional event, that temporary spike can gradually become part of a longer, more sustained pattern. This is where many people underestimate just how much psychological well-being intersects with physical health, treating the two as though they exist entirely separately, when in reality they are deeply connected. Simple techniques such as slow, deep breathing for just a few minutes each day, gentle stretching, quiet meditation, or even stepping outside for a few minutes of fresh air can help activate the body's natural relaxation response, sometimes called the parasympathetic nervous system. This is not about eliminating stress entirely from your life, which is not realistic for most people living in the modern world, but about giving the nervous system regular, reliable opportunities to reset and recover. Some people find that spending just a few minutes on quiet, intentional breathing each morning, before checking a phone or diving into the day's obligations, provides a noticeably calmer baseline that carries through the rest of their day. This particular habit tends to be one of the most overlooked on this entire list, yet it may offer some of the most meaningful long-term support for cardiovascular health, and we will return to why a little later in this video. Carlos, a 60-year-old small business owner from Texas, had spent decades running his own auto repair shop, juggling finances, staff schedules, and customer demands almost every waking hour. He assumed his elevated blood pressure was simply the price of being successful, something he had made peace with. At his doctor's suggestion, he started closing his shop for 5 quiet minutes each afternoon, sitting in his office with the door shut, breathing slowly and deliberately before returning to work. He was skeptical at first, admitting it felt almost silly to pause in the middle of a busy day. Several months later, his readings had improved enough that his doctor asked what had changed, and Carlos, somewhat surprised himself, could only point to those 5 quiet minutes he had committed to every single day without fail. Number 4, limiting alcohol intake with intention. Alcohol, when consumed in excess, has a well-documented relationship with elevated blood pressure over time. Even moderate, seemingly harmless regular drinking can add up in ways that are easy to underestimate, since a single glass of wine with dinner most nights of the week becomes a consistent, sustained pattern rather than an occasional indulgence reserved for special moments. Health organizations generally suggest limiting alcohol to no more than 1 drink per day for women and 2 drinks per day for men, though individual recommendations can vary quite a bit depending on personal health history, which is why a conversation with a healthcare provider is genuinely valuable if you are uncertain about what is appropriate for your own situation. Reducing alcohol intake does not mean eliminating enjoyment or social connection from your life entirely. Many people find that swapping a nightly drink for a sparkling water with a slice of lime, or reserving alcohol specifically for special occasions rather than everyday routine, becomes a habit that feels sustainable and even refreshing rather than restrictive or punishing. Number 5, prioritizing real, consistent sleep. Sleep is often the single most neglected piece of the blood pressure puzzle, yet its impact may be greater than many people realize. During deep, restorative sleep, blood pressure naturally dips somewhat, giving the entire cardiovascular system a valuable period of rest and recovery. When sleep is consistently shortened, interrupted, or of poor quality, that nightly dip may not happen properly, and over time this disruption can contribute to sustained blood pressure elevation. Conditions like sleep apnea, a disorder where breathing repeatedly stops and starts throughout the night without the person fully realizing it, are particularly linked to hypertension and often go undiagnosed for years, sometimes even decades. Dorothy, a 63-year-old grandmother from Georgia, had assumed her constant daytime fatigue was simply a normal part of getting older, something to be quietly accepted. It was not until her daughter noticed her unusually loud snoring during a weekend visit that Dorothy was gently encouraged to bring the issue up with her doctor, which eventually led to a formal sleep apnea diagnosis and appropriate treatment. Once the condition was properly addressed, both her energy levels and her blood pressure readings improved noticeably within a matter of months. Aiming for 7 to 9 hours of consistent, quality sleep each night, and going to bed around the same time whenever possible, even on weekends, may support healthier blood pressure regulation over the long term. We are now halfway through this list, and if you have been nodding along so far, here is why the second half matters just as much, if not more, than the first. The habits still ahead touch on things many people never think to connect to blood pressure at all, including the food choices hiding in plain sight on grocery store shelves, the number on the bathroom scale, the coffee cup in your hand right now, and even something as simple as who you spend your evenings with. Stick with us because the habit we teased at the very beginning of this video is coming up soon, and it may change how you think about your daily routine entirely. Number 6. Adding more potassium-rich foods to your plate. While sodium tends to get most of the public attention when people discuss blood pressure, potassium plays an equally important, complementary role that deserves just as much recognition. Potassium helps the body balance out the effects of sodium and may help relax blood vessel walls, which in turn can ease overall pressure within the circulatory system. Foods naturally rich in potassium include bananas, sweet potatoes, spinach, oranges, and beans, all of which are widely available and relatively inexpensive. Rather than thinking about this habit as a restrictive diet change that requires giving something up, many people find it easier and more sustainable to think in terms of addition rather than subtraction, simply adding one more potassium-rich food to a daily meal instead of attempting to overhaul an entire eating pattern all at once. This small, manageable shift, repeated daily over weeks and months, can gradually improve the overall nutritional balance of what someone eats without ever feeling like a drastic or overwhelming transformation. Number 7. Working toward and maintaining a healthy weight gradually. Carrying excess weight, particularly around the midsection, has been associated with increased blood pressure in numerous studies, partly because it can place additional demand on the heart and the entire circulatory system as it works to move blood throughout a larger body. The important word here, and one worth repeating, is gradually. Rapid, extreme weight loss approaches are rarely sustainable over the long term and can sometimes carry their own health risks, so a slow and steady approach, built naturally from the habits already mentioned earlier in this video, tends to be both safer and considerably more effective in the long run. Even a modest reduction in body weight, achieved gradually through consistent movement and mindful eating rather than extreme restriction, has been associated with meaningful improvements in blood pressure readings for many individuals. This particular habit is less about reaching a specific number on a scale and more about building sustainable daily patterns that naturally support a healthier weight over time, almost as a byproduct of the other habits already being practiced. Linda, a 59-year-old office manager from North Carolina, spent years cycling through restrictive diets that promised fast results, only to regain the weight within months each time. It was not until she stopped chasing quick fixes and instead focused on the smaller habits, a daily walk during her lunch break, swapping her afternoon soda for water, and paying closer attention to portion sizes at dinner, that she began to see slow but steady change. Her doctor noted that her blood pressure improved alongside her weight, not because either change happened overnight, but because both were the product of the same quiet consistency built over the better part of a year. Number 8. Being mindful of caffeine, especially later in the day. Caffeine can cause a short-term spike in blood pressure, particularly in people who do not consume it regularly or who are especially sensitive to its effects. For habitual coffee or tea drinkers, the body often builds up a certain degree of tolerance over time, though individual sensitivity still varies quite a bit from person to person. Rather than eliminating caffeine altogether, which is not necessary or realistic for most people who enjoy their morning coffee, it may be worth paying closer attention to how your own body responds throughout the day, and considering cutting off caffeine intake by early afternoon so that it does not interfere with the deep, restorative sleep we discussed a few sections ago. Being aware of hidden caffeine sources as well, things like certain sodas, energy drinks, chocolate, or even some over-the-counter medications, can also help someone get a clearer, more accurate picture of their total daily caffeine intake, which is often higher than people initially assume. Number 9. Moving away from tobacco use one day at a time. Every single cigarette causes a temporary spike in both blood pressure and heart rate, and over years of repeated use, smoking can gradually damage the delicate lining of blood vessels, making them stiffer and considerably less able to relax and expand properly. This stiffness may contribute to sustained high blood pressure well beyond the moments of active smoking itself, becoming a lasting change to the cardiovascular system. Quitting smoking is widely recognized by medical professionals as one of the single most impactful things a person can do for their entire cardiovascular system, not just for blood pressure alone, but for heart and lung health more broadly. It is also, admittedly, one of the harder habits on this entire list to change, and that is worth acknowledging honestly rather than glossing over with an oversimplified message. Support systems, whether through a healthcare provider, a structured support group, or nicotine replacement options discussed openly with a doctor, can make a meaningful and often decisive difference for people working toward this particular goal. Progress here often looks like one day at a time, one small victory building upon the next, rather than a single dramatic moment of complete transformation. It is also worth noting that the cardiovascular benefits of quitting begin surprisingly quickly. Within just a few weeks of stopping, circulation tends to improve, and within a year, the added risk to heart health from smoking begins to drop substantially compared to someone who continues. For many people, hearing that the body starts repairing itself almost immediately, rather than only after years of abstinence, becomes a meaningful source of motivation during the harder early days of quitting. Number 10. Checking your blood pressure at home and staying connected to others. This final habit ties everything else together, and it is the one we hinted at earlier in the video. Regularly monitoring blood pressure at home, using a simple and properly validated cuff device, allows people to notice patterns and trends over time rather than relying entirely on a single reading taken during an occasionally stressful doctor's office visit. Some people experience what is known as white coat syndrome, a phenomenon where blood pressure temporarily rises simply due to the anxiety or nervousness of being in a medical setting, which can make consistent home readings a far more accurate reflection of everyday, real-world life. Alongside this practical habit, maintaining strong social connections, friendships, family relationships, and community involvement has been associated with meaningfully better cardiovascular outcomes across several long-term studies. Frank, a 75-year-old widower living in Arizona, began attending a weekly card game with his neighbors after his daughter gently encouraged him to get out of the house, more often following the loss of his wife. Around the same time, he also started tracking his blood pressure each morning as part of a new personal routine. He often said that the two habits together, staying connected to people he cared about and staying aware of his own numbers, gave him a genuine sense of control that he had not felt in years, especially during a period of his life that had otherwise felt uncertain. This particular combination of self-awareness and genuine human connection may be one of the most underappreciated tools available for long-term cardiovascular well-being, precisely because it addresses both the physical and emotional sides of health at the very same time. Bringing it all together, none of these 10 habits work in complete isolation from one another, and none of them require perfection to be worthwhile. Small, consistent choices, checking a sodium label, taking a daily walk, spending a few minutes on deep breathing, getting a full night of sleep, adding an extra piece of fruit to a meal. These choices accumulate quietly over weeks and months in ways that are easy to underestimate in the moment, but significant when viewed over time. One statistic worth remembering from earlier in this video is that the majority of sodium in a typical American diet comes not from the salt shaker sitting on the kitchen table, but from processed and packaged foods purchased at the grocery store, which means that awareness alone, simply pausing to read a nutrition label, can be one of the most powerful and immediately accessible changes available to almost anyone watching this video right now. Blood pressure management is rarely, if ever, about one single dramatic change made in a single moment. It tends to be about the quiet, steady accumulation of small, repeated choices, made consistently, day after day, week after week. It can also be worth remembering that you do not need to adopt all 10 of these habits at once. In fact, trying to change everything simultaneously is often what causes people to give up altogether within a few weeks, overwhelmed by the sheer number of new rules they have set for themselves. A more realistic and often more successful approach is to choose just one habit from this video, the one that felt most doable or most relevant to your own life, and focus on it consistently for the next 2 to 3 weeks before adding another. Small wins stacked one on top of the other tend to build a kind of quiet momentum that sweeping, all-at-once changes rarely manage to sustain. Whether that starting point is a daily walk, a closer look at nutrition labels, or simply going to bed 20 minutes earlier, the specific starting habit matters far less than the decision to actually begin and to keep going. If you found this video helpful, we would genuinely love to hear from you. Which of these 10 habits do you think would make the biggest difference in your own daily routine? And is there one you are already doing without fully realizing how much it might be helping you? Share your thoughts down in the comments below. We truly do read them. If this video gave you something useful or gave you a new perspective, please consider sharing it with someone else who might benefit from it too. Whether that is a parent, a grandparent, or simply a friend who has been talking about their own blood pressure lately. And if you would like more educational content like this in the future, subscribing helps you stay connected for what comes next. Thank you so much for watching and take care of yourself, one small habit at a time.